Hey there and welcome to another episode of Lessons on Learning. Quick fire videos, 15 minutes or less, just looking at how people learn and how we can use that information to create very effective and engaging training sessions for our learners. I recently got asked a question and the person asked, Chris, what do we do when some of our learners finish the work much earlier than everyone else and they're stood around looking bored? Do we just let them go? How do we keep them engaged? Well, that's a really interesting question, and it boils down to something called differentiation. The question first that we need to ask ourselves is, why are these people finishing so early in the first place, and what can we do about that? Well, in this video we're going to try and answer that, so let's dive in. Differentiation simply means helping different people get to the same place in a variety of different ways, depending on what their strengths are and what they still need to work on. It doesn't really mean teaching different things to different people. It means keeping the same destination, but creating different pathways. Think of it as being like a mountain. So we've got this mountain here, and there are lots of different routes on the mountain. Now, everybody in our training session, they have to get to the pinnacle, to the peak of the mountain, or maybe they have to get all the way across it in order to be able to move on. Now, there are going to be some people who are really experienced climbers. They're very fit and they're very agile and they've got all the right gear and stuff like that, and they can traverse their way up a really rocky and challenging route in order to get to the peak. But there are also going to be some people who are less experienced and perhaps they don't have the right gear, and maybe rather than wearing climbing boots, maybe they're wearing Converse sneakers or something like that. So they're going to need a slightly different pathway to get to the same peak. They're going to need to create a much more forgiving, meandering, winding path that takes them, rather than taking them up the rocky side of the mountain, takes them up the grassy meadow side of the mountain. Maybe as well, they're also going to need some checkpoints and some signposts and some resources and what have you, some kit and something here to help them get on their way. So they're going to need a little bit more help from you as an educator. So that's really what differentiation means. Can you create different pathways to the same destination? Now, don't worry too much about time, because although the green path may take a little bit longer because it's longer distance, remember the red path is fraught with much more challenge and many more obstacles. So in other words, there's a little bit more to do. So if you do this well, actually all learners should get to the same peak at about the same time, having overcome more or less obstacles to get there. Let's dive in a little bit more and kind of clarify this and take it apart a little bit. So what a lot of educators and trainers will do is they'll do something that we call teach to the middle. And that's kind of like teaching generally to the middle ability. And that's really good. It's really useful, makes a lot of sense. But if we do that, there's always going to be some people in our classroom to whom this information is relatively straightforward and not particularly challenging. And although it means that they can do it relatively easy, if it's not particularly challenging, they're either going to finish very quickly and you're going to wonder what to do with them, or they're going to get a little bit bored and disengaged or possibly even disruptive. Not usually, but sometimes. And then also, if you're going to be teaching to the middle, there's going to be other people who to whom this information is still quite challenging and still takes a lot of getting to grips with, and maybe they're not quite there yet. And so what you end up doing is you end up sort of the people at the top tend to get a little bored, and the people lower down tend to get a little confused, and you end up with these margins of people. So differentiation is about being able to manage both of those groups of people while still being able to teach to the majority of the class. So again, let's deep dive and have a look at how we can manage some of these things. So the initial question that I got asked is, Chris, how do I deal with those students, those learners who are finishing really early, who are done so much more than everybody else, and they're stood around with nothing to do? And my initial response to that was, well, why are they finishing so quickly? Why are they finishing early? Why is the task easy for them to do, and why have we not created something that's a little bit more challenging for them? You see, the reason that they're finishing early is because the task isn't quite stretching them enough. In other words, they belong we're teaching to the middle, but they belong in that upper band. And so what we have to do is we have to figure out how we can challenge them. Now look, everybody's coming to the class for a particular thing, whatever that particular thing is, and that's represented by this red line here. This is kind of like the middle, if you like, and this is the ticket price. You see, it's not enough to be able to start changing the content or changing the destination, because people have come into your class expecting a particular thing, so you have to deliver at least that. But it does mean that you can have some other tricks up your sleeve. So for instance, what do you have available to you that you could use just to challenge these kind of experts, these capable people? What could you do to challenge them a little bit more? So is there an additional task that you could put on top of the initial task? Could you introduce some slightly different concepts? Could you ask them to figure out certain problems or apply the information in a slightly different way? So for instance, a learner has got to a particular level. Can you now say, okay, now what can you do to tweak this level to create a little bit more XYZ or a little bit less ABC? So you could offer what we call what if challenges. You know, what if you needed to do this? And what if the person needed that? How would you adjust it? And what if the problem was this instead of that? How would you adjust this information? So you're giving them thinking tasks, what if tasks, problem solving tasks. What you could also do is get them to enhance things. So for instance, if the task is to bake a cake, well, now what you're asking them to do is to bake the cake, but how could they make it into a two-tiered cake with some kind of filling in the middle? Or how could they do something with the decoration of the cake to turn it into a slightly more enhanced version of what they already have? The other thing that you can ask them to do is to move into something that we call peer-to-peer teaching. Now that's often misconstrued. A lot of people think peer-to-peer teaching is getting advanced people to help slightly less advanced people. Sometimes, but it also can mean getting groups of similar ability learners together to workshop together, to kind of teach each other, to kind of pick up on something that the other one might have missed. And so what can you give them that enhances the original task to keep them more challenged? So remember the mountain analogy? What we're saying to them, look, if you're finding this path really easy, why don't you go over there to the left, and there's some rocky outcrops and you might have to sort of climb with all fours and navigate a new route or scramble through some gaps or that kind of thing. Is this making sense, my friends? And then of course, then you've got your less able learners. So if they're really struggling, if they're finding it difficult to reach this place, what can you offer them? Rather than dumbing it down, don't think of it like that, and certainly don't think of it as being less of a task, but what can you offer them that might provide more tools, more resources, more help? So for instance, can you break the task down into even smaller steps? Can you get groups of learners to work together with you in a slightly more concentrated way? Can you create handouts, written resources, visual resources that really break things down into step by step? Are there video shorts or video-based resources that you can use? What can you do to offer them more signposts, more tools, kind of more equipment? So for instance, they're walking up this path on this mountain, they're finding it really difficult. So can you say to them, look, here's a different pair of shoes that helps you get more grip. Let me take some of these things from your pack so that I can carry that for you. Try moving in a zigzag rather than moving in a straight line. So you're still sending them to the same destination. You're just kind of altering the resources that they have. Does that make sense? So look, here's the thing. If you have learners in your group that are getting to the end of the task and the class is still not finished, but you can see them getting toward the end of the task, what do you have in your toolkit? What do you have in your back pocket that could offer them slightly more challenge? For instance, hey, look, I can see you're really flying with this. You're really comfortable with this. So here's what I want you to do. I'd like you to increase that by 10%, or I'd like to imagine that you have 50% less material to work with, or I'd like you to create an enhancement with this, or what would you do if you had less time to do this? What would you do if you had to do two at the same time? I'm not sure what task you're teaching and what skill sector you're in, but what can you do to enhance and elevate the challenge for that particular learner? Again, go back to the mountain analogy. If they're really motoring up the mountain and they're going to get there before anybody else, can you send them to a different part of the mountain that would challenge them just a little bit more? Because remember, challenge creates engagement. And if they're getting to the end of the task so much quicker than everybody else, then we need to go back and we need to figure out the level of challenge that we had prepared for them. Does that make sense? It's our duty to create the appropriate level of challenge for learners in Converse sneakers and the learners with the hiking boots and the crampons. We have to be able to challenge both those sets of learners and still get them to the peak of the mountain. Look, I hope that helps, my friends. If you want a little bit more information, or you want me to do more videos on differentiation, create some more concrete ideas, just drop a comment and I'll create some more videos. I'll do it if it's needed. And of course, if there's anything else that I can do for you, any other videos that I can create for you, drop a comment. But first of all, if you found this useful, please like it, please give me a little thumbs up, and above all, please subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so. And of course, share this channel with any of your friends that might be interested. I hope that helps, my friend. I will be back very soon. Keep tuned on this channel. More videos coming soon on how we can use lessons on learning to create the most effective learning sessions for our learners. All right, take care. I'll see you soon, my friend. Bye-bye.